thinking that something's inherently wrong with us. And I love to tell clients, I've been victimized, but I'm not a victim.
Yeah.
And that's a really important perspective, because the antidote to trauma is to become aware and to become empowered of how to take care of yourself and to make sense of your story.
The Best Is Yet to Come is a podcast about dating later in life. It's co-hosted by Tonya Carter, Brenda Yamas, and me, Richard D'Ambrosio. We're all exploring dating from a fun but sophisticated, sexy, and smart perspective. And we're going to be tackling every issue that mature men and women face while seeking love, companionship, and yes, sex. So you can follow us on our private Facebook group and on our YouTube page. Please join us in this discussion about one of the most important things a human being can have, a relationship with a significant other. Welcome to episode 12 of The Best Is Yet to Come. We are going to be talking about healing yourself from any type of trauma that you may have had coming into a relationship. And we're going to have our second guest, Linda Wajda. And we'll introduce Linda in a little bit. But ladies, can I just first, before we get started, say thank you so much for that incredible last episode. You guys took a topic like sex. You made it fun. You made it adult. There were some great tidbits in there where I think a lot of us adults struggle to sort of benchmark ourselves about, is that okay? Is that acceptable behavior? And for you guys to do what you did last week, where you just put it out on the table and you said, these are some of our experiences. I loved it. Brenda, you brought so many male experiences into the episode.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you so much. That was a delight to listen to. And I know a couple of people already said to me that, as adults, they kind of learned a couple of things. So
okay.
Alrighty. That's good.
and I'm not going to talk about, I was going to ask a question to you, Brenda.
What's that?
How many bottles of wine were there?
Oh, gosh.
I'm hoping it was just one.
It was just one.
Good.
It was just one, but that was one too many.
It was so fun.
It looked like fun, and and we've all said, for anybody who's watching us, listening to us, we have said this is going to happen a lot where we're not going to be available on a Friday. So, who's going to run the show and how, and the great dynamic between the two of you. I'm like, look, I may just, cop out and tell you I'm doing something on a Friday when I've got nothing.
No.
Not fair.
This way I can just have fun.
We were like, that is a way we can play.
Linda, thank you for joining us on a Friday night. And I was thinking to kick things off, one of the most topical discussions about trauma going on in America right now is this concept that Britney Spears has lived through, 12, 15 years of conservatorship? Some crazy 13 years. 13. And it was interesting because when you looked at her testimony during the trial to remove her father from that role, she said, these people have traumatized me. And what I thought about when I was reading through that and thinking about how Linda is going to walk us through how we need to think about trauma was this whole concept that trauma comes in many shapes and forms. And I was wondering, all three of you, chime in at will. I think Britney Spears is in a relationship right now, but what signs have you seen in her that indicate to you either you've seen somebody like that in your life that's suffered through something that wasn't, physical abuse or maybe sexual molestation or something like that, but trauma of another kind, where as a dater, you were like, oh, I think I see the source of why they treated me that way. Any observations?
Well, I think for me, my observation would have to be girlfriends who have experienced trauma from their parents and their parents' treatment of them,
Yes.
Lack of a daddy's love, so you cling to the man who's going to be the father figure.
Yep.
Or even women who have suffered abuse and now their kids have watched that abuse or lived through that abuse or experienced it with them. I have one person whose mother was just abused by every man she met. So this one girl is like, no, you know what? I don't even want to date. Like, I'm straight, but no, I don't trust a man. And I have another friend whose father abused her and her mother. And now she's so strong. She's just so aggressive when it comes to dating guys because she has to prove that you're not going to hit me. I'm not going to take it and I'm in control. Right. So it's just two ends of the scale, but it's really bad either way you look at it.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Linda.
Sure. I'm so glad to be here with you guys. And I was reading the article with Brittany, with her own testimony in court. And I felt really emotional reading that. It's like a person, I don't know her. I don't know her father. So I can't really comment, but just the urgency almost of someone who was being held hostage. And she seemed to not be in denial that she definitely has some mental health challenges, but she seemed at the same time to have the recognition that whatever arrangement there was has gone way beyond its usefulness to become something else altogether.
And by that context that you just discussed, Linda, the older a person gets, the more experienced they are in the world, the more they're looking at the dichotomy of their life with other people. I mean, she knows lots of celebrities. She's worked with Lady Gaga. She's worked with all these other people, and seeing and hearing about their lives and looking at her life. What did that do to her brain to think, look at all these other people living a normal life. What are they doing to me? And then how does she internalize that? Yeah.
I think they use her mental illness as a weapon instead of helping her.
They did.
They use it as a weapon to persecute her and hold her hostage.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if she can't win, because if she's doing well, then they could say the conservatorship is working. But if she's not doing well, then they can say, well, she needs the conservatorship. Yeah. So and I was really struck. You take someone like Kanye, who had a public meltdown and spent all his money running for president, and he's a guy, so he
gets away with it.
Him. So I think of the misogyny in that.
Very much so.
I so agree with that. I think it's despicable. Like, to me, I almost compared it to modern day slavery, because she had no control over anything, and yet they're telling her, you must work here, you must do this, you must do that. Oh, but you can't do that. Oh, but you only have, what was it, a $1,500 allowance that she had?
Yes.
Something like that. I mean, yeah.
I know of one male who has shared enough with me that I'm pretty sure there was some lesser trauma, and maybe I'm curious to get started with Linda as soon as we can, because I don't think his trauma was physical abuse or slavery or anything that to the extreme that we're talking about right now. But one of the things that I've seen in him and in many females that I've dated is this trauma of neglect, lack of emotional connection at an early enough age, where there's a worry for abandonment, and as a result, sort of a clinginess in the personality, especially in relationships. I've seen that multiple times in people as an older dater. And it just goes to show you, somebody in their late 40s, early 50s is still carrying that with them from 35 years ago. Wow.
Well, in most of my coaching practice, most of the people I meet who have trauma, they don't even recognize they have trauma. Right. And, when I listen to Brittany say, like, I'm doing fine, but no, really, I wasn't doing fine. That's actually could be a traumatic response. People think of fight, flight, or freeze, but there's also this idea of fawn of she's dependent on them for her well-being. So that people pleasing and saying she's fine.
Right.
So, and we tend to make things that are trauma symptoms, mental health symptoms, or character symptoms. And that's a really complicated thing for a clinician, really.
I did date somebody like that, Linda, who whenever we would touch on the emotional part, of what I thought had been some kind of parental indifference that caused trauma, I'm fine. I'm fine. Well, maybe you should go see somebody about that. Why? Nobody can help me with this. I'm fine. Don't worry. I've gotten over it. I've processed it. I'd be like, okay, I'm going to shut my mouth now. So we're going to jump into it. Let me first introduce Linda so everybody who's watching has a little bit of understanding about why we've asked her. So Linda is the owner of her coaching practice, One Braver Life. And Linda's going to describe for us exactly what a trauma-informed coach for relational recovery is, but she's certified in multiple disciplines. She's certified as a professional coach. She works with clients both locally and nationally. She's actually based in the Hudson Valley nearby me. She provides coaching services virtually. So if anybody who's watching is not in the area, do reach out to her, and we're going to let Linda give you some of that contact information towards the end because she is available virtually. She's trained with the Gottman Institute, and I love those people. They do some of the best research, and I love the foundational elements of their advice for marriage and committed relationships. Linda has a special passion for supporting women who've experienced some kind of intimate partner betrayal. And I've had experience with women who've had intimate partner betrayal, and I don't think they've gotten over it. Or at least that was the sense I got in the relationship. She's a graduate of the University of Virginia, the Institute for Excellence in Professional Coaching. And she's also a member of the International Coach Federation and the Association for Clinical Pastoral Education. Right now, Linda is in the process of completing another certification with the Association of Partners of Sex Addicts Trauma Specialists. Linda, thank you so much for joining us today. You're so accomplished and have such a wide variety of experience. And I'll say this right now, Linda is also a loved wife and mother of 3 boys. So that's the rest of her life.
Thank you, Richard. I'm so glad to be here with you guys. Thank you for having me.
So the first question I have for you, and I want to get a little bit more into trauma informed in a second, but there's so many definitions of trauma, and I've been, doing a lot of reading, not necessarily researching lately. How varied is the concept of trauma from, I think, what we would have thought it to be to define it, say, 10 years ago? Do you feel like trauma is more broadly defined today? And if so, what does that look like?
Sure. That's a great question. I think traditionally, 10 years ago, most people have become familiar with trauma through the lens of veterans who were infected in combat. So post-traumatic stress disorder.
Right.
And that's a very specific type of trauma, but not every traumatic experience that a person has needs to lead to a mental health diagnosis. So trauma is something that affects us spiritually, emotionally, mentally, physically, and temporarily our ability to cope and process is overwhelmed. And when you think about it, it's pretty logical because it's a normal response to something extraordinary. So that can be that whole fight, flight, or freeze type of thing. And I like to add fawn because I think for women especially, that's a big one.
Linda, I've experienced, I think myself, and I think I've seen it in other people, that there are varying forms of trauma that if you're paying attention to how you react to certain situations, what the patterns are, you can potentially say to yourself, maybe I experienced something extremely deep and I could label it trauma because I'm not necessarily reacting in those situations in a healthy manner. How broad does trauma get in your specialties?
A complicated question. So the women that I work with a lot of times, and I work with men too, but right now most of my clients are women. Mm-hmm. The reason why finding out that your partner is a sex addict or finding out that your partner has betrayed you through infidelity, either emotionally or physically, is you're being deprived of your reality. So when you think about you're in a relationship together, you want to be able to trust the other person and feel that you're safe. And if the other person is purposefully trying to make you believe you're safe when in fact you're not, that's where the trauma comes from. And of the person pretending to be in the relationship when they're really at some level not. They have some other compartmentalized reality. And it can be really broad, really, when you think about it, like for children who grow up in homes where there's addiction, where there's rage. It's a pretty common human experience. And it's far broader, I think, than the idea of having to go to combat and experience trauma that way.
And we have someone here who did go to combat. And I'm kind of curious, Brenda, when you think about some of the people that you've served with and people who haven't served, have you seen any commonality in behavior patterns that you think you can discern better, sort of severe trauma from something like going into battle, and people who just, until you get to know them, you're suspecting that there was something going on in their lives prior to you meeting them, and that's also a result or resulted in certain behaviors?
We have done so much work, and the military has come a long way in trying to prepare us, right, to when we come back and address those issues. They place, in the last few years, they've placed a lot of importance in resilience training so that we can deal with some of these, right, some of these issues. And they've done a lot of work in us taking away that stigma of, if you need help, talk to someone. They've done a lot of work around that. But on one hand, it's kind of easy to kind of see some of, because we just talk about commonalities. We talk about, I can't go to the mall. I can't, for whatever reason, right? I can't, my thing is helicopters. There's a very specific reason why helicopters. For other people is walking on gravel, because everywhere we went there was gravel and you used to walk, and the sound of gravel, for me, the sound of gravel and walking on gravel is just, wow. It's like, I cannot stand that. For others, more because you know more what they've been through. And so you kind of sort of know, but on the other hand, though, there's still a lot of trauma that we don't talk about, because we still, we come back, we don't share. We come back and we say, I'm supposed to be strong, and I have to be strong for myself and my comrades. I have to lead by example. So I can't show any weakness because I have to stand in front of these guys and be their leader. And I can't, I can't be broken in front of them. And that has led,
has that made you more sensitive as an adult to seeing the behaviors of other adults and being able to either cut them slack or be there for them in some listening capacity, because you're realizing they didn't go to war, but you could pick up that they've had something go on in their life and maybe they just need me to let them know I'm a safe place?
Yeah, I think for me, I what I tell myself is that maybe it's a combination of that and age and getting older, but I feel like I need to give people more grace. I give them more room, more grace.
That's the wisdom of age. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, for sure. And so, because you never know, and and coming from a community that I come from, right, a Black and brown community, that we're so full of trauma for so many different reasons, right? Many of them that we don't talk about, that we just soldier on and that we try to make it. And so you always know when you talk about childhood, when you talk about the past, I think for me, I automatically, the light bulbs go off like, I can see, I can see something there. I don't know exactly what, but I can understand.
And that can cause you to just be sensitive. You've got your antenna up and that person isn't being a jerk. Something else is going on. I mean, they may be being a jerk. We don't want to give them excuses to be a jerk, but you also know it's not that they're just a nasty person. This has been triggered somehow.
Yeah, and then mostly, I don't think for me personally, I haven't seen it in it being nasty. It's always it manifests for me is in men, especially when I'm dating, is how reserved or how quiet they can get about a certain subject or certain subjects that we just won't even talk about, right? We just stop, right? Like there's this wall where that's as far as we're going to go in conversation. So that's been my experience.
Tonya, I don't want to jump to any conclusions, but I remember when you and I were talking very early on in the podcast series, and you talked about the period where you decided there were going to be no men in your life because you were raising your daughter. You didn't want to expose her to things that you had seen when you were a young girl. Do you look back now on that and say to some degree, maybe you had sort of these microaggressions, these traumatizing events that weren't, something huge, but they were enough that they conditioned you in that you are kind of still resolving some of these things?
Well, I guess so. I guess back to what she said earlier is that you get so used to it, you don't even think that it's trauma.
Right.
And even my mama was very protective of us. So it's not that my mom didn't date. She didn't have people in the house. And so it wasn't a big thing for me not to date because, just lead by example, she didn't either.
Right.
Of course, if she was dating or there was a Friday night fish fry or something like that, then you had people come in, guests came into the home or different types of things. And that's really when the perverts would come out. One of my friends, oh my God, I almost called her name. She talks about one of her good friends who was about 8 or 9 years old. They were at a party at her parents' house, was having a cookout or a family event. And she said her friend, they even spoke about this recently, if she thinks about it, she can smell the food that was cooking. She can hear the music that was playing. But there was her father's very good friend in full view of her father, looking at her father, molested her right there in the middle of the living room with everybody laughing and everybody talking and so much going on. And that she was never able to tell her dad because, her dad would have probably killed the guy. Horrifying. And so for this woman to be in her 60s now, and she's still talking about that, that's a trauma that's never been dealt with. Yeah. And as Brenda said, in the Black and brown community, I always heard, don't talk about what goes on in our house. What happens in our house is our business. It's our business. Don't tell anyone. And that allows the molestation or the domestic violence or the incest, whatever trauma is happening to just fester and grow and build. So, I don't feel like that I have any trauma, but it could be that I have some trauma that I just haven't let go of. Of course, there has to be a reason why I kept my daughter so sheltered so she would not be traumatized. So maybe at 13, I was traumatized. And at 52, I'm thinking about, it wasn't that bad,
One of the things, and I'm going to go to Linda in a second, one of the things that I think happened during my longest term relationship was the other person very frequently would write down these very angry thoughts about me in notebooks and on pieces of paper and then leave them lying around where I could find them.
Wow.
I don't know if that was intentional or part of a disorganized mind that just didn't know how to hide it and keep it in a safe place, because they were in places I did not have to go very far to find them. They were literally in common living spaces. And
I think she was being passive aggressive.
And
she didn't know how to tell you herself.
I started to believe a lot of that stuff about myself over time, because this happened for so many years. And there were so many, like she must have lost sight of where she had put that notebook down. So she started a new one. So there were half a dozen of these that I eventually stumbled upon because I was cleaning the house. And to some degree, I kind of feel like that shaped me a lot to not believe in myself, to think that, to question whether or not I was a nice person. And I think for the first couple of relationships I had after the separation, I think I brought a little bit of that with me. And looking back now, I doubted myself. I had somewhat of a low self-esteem view of myself as a man. And I'm, Linda, as you're listening to us, that definition that we were talking about at the very beginning, do you deal with a lot of this kind of stuff as well in your practice, that it's not always full on molestation? It's micro stuff.
Well, and I might reframe that word micro, because if something happens to you that causes that internal wound, that's significant, right? And your pain matters, whether it was something really horrific like molestation or whether it was something smaller. Your pain is still significant for who you are and how you relate. And I was really struck with both what Tonya said and what Brenda said. And if you listened and how they shared their story, the physicality of the trauma experience, right? I can smell, I can hear, I can see. And that's because trauma stores differently in our brain than our regular memories. And those things come back. For some people, it's very vivid, and it's very sensorial. So they store in there until they're really dealt with. And I do believe you, Tonya, that could happen. I talk to women. I have a client who is in 70s and experienced some very difficult things and carried that through her life until she was able to release that by talking about it. So that's a great thing, because breaking the silence and having intimate relationships, real friendships, that's so important, because trauma can produce shame that we think we're somehow defective.
That would be me. That would be me. That's what I left that previous relationship with, a lot of shame. Yep.
Thinking that something's inherently wrong with us. And I love to tell clients, I've been victimized, but I'm not a victim.
Yeah.
And that's a really important perspective, because the antidote to trauma is to become aware and to become empowered of how to take care of yourself and to make sense of your story.
Let's talk about that now, Linda. So in your practice, people come to you with a variety of experiences that can be defined in some form as trauma. What are some of the most foundational things that people have to do? I think you just said, look, you've got to state it. You've got to sort of try to identify it. Sure. What's your process?
Well, I'm not a clinician, so I'm a coach, and I have extra training to support women who've been traumatized, but I don't treat trauma per se. So I would say I work with trauma. And what I mean by working with trauma is I recognize and honor that that's part of the person's story. If I need to, I have a network of people that I can make a clinical referral, where there are some really amazing trauma specialists here in New York. And I have some connections in other parts of the country. But a lot of times when I see women, it's when they're at the phase of post-traumatic growth, that they've made sense of some of their story. If it's very early on, say in a case of betrayal, where a wife has found out that her husband isn't who she thought he was, or vice versa, the very first thing is to establish safety and reality. So, because a person has to feel safe in order to heal. And that means if they're going to be together, that behavior has to stop. And then there's a process to bring everything out into the light, a very structured process. Or they may decide that it would be safer to separate. So, but you can't heal if you're constantly being triggered over and over and over. So safety is number one. And after a person is safe, the next thing would be grief, because trauma it affects, our dreams for our life, of how we see ourselves, of how our stories that we told ourselves about who we were and who people in our lives were. So those stories, that a lot of times somebody would need therapeutic help with, to tease apart those stories. I do a lot of the grief through the pastoral piece of that work. And when somebody really does that work, it's transformative of what they can do and how they can grow as they start to make sense of their story.
Also, I like the way that she said what she said about microaggressions. We use the word micro. I don't want to say so like cavalier, but Black and brown people and women, everyone, but basically us, we deal with a lot of microaggressions, And it is so small that you can't see it, but boy, don't you feel it.
Yeah.
So I like what you said about the microaggressions.
I have a friend of mine who lives in Northern Florida. She is brown, and she talks about how certain restaurants always place her and her boyfriend near the bathroom.
Yeah.
Consistently.
Wow.
And you can feel it when you walk in the door, you know, the way they look at you, the way they, and someone standing beside you, if they're white, they never had to deal with that. They like, you know, I was looking at Colin Kaepernick's special on Netflix, and it just, the microaggressions throughout, like, you can't have this cookie, you can't have this ice cream cone. Who are you here? Why are you here? What are you doing? I had a snap off on a lady at Phil's Plaza one day. I went in there and with my nieces and nephews, and she was like, "What are you doing here, Lord? Help her." She'll never ever say anything else to anybody without thinking of me. And I want her to always think of me because I lit right into her. We're not supposed to be at Phil's Plaza or Lenox Mall or whatever. We can't afford to shop here. It's just ridiculous, you know.
And it points out that you may not, as a dater, be aware of what you're bringing into a relationship because you may not think of this traditional definition of trauma as a car accident, losing a loved one in a tragic event, you know, some crazy thing like molestation or, you know, other forms of physical abuse. How important, Linda, is it for someone, you know, we're, you know, the group of us are older in life. We tend to have had much longer term relationships than somebody in their 20s or 30s. So when we find ourselves divorced or widowed or whatever, we're coming out of that, perhaps having been with somebody for 2 decades, and we're normalizing that long-term relationship as that's what relationships are like. What do you find is the ability for someone to start dating again if they have not addressed these various forms of trauma?
Wow. That's a hard
Sorry.
I was going to say, wow.
I need my crystal ball.
Okay.
And for anybody listening, Linda's probably going to come back at least once every 3 months because we can break each one of these issues down to a 45-minute discussion just on that question alone.
I don't know. I'm a big believer in whether you're divorced, whether you're not divorced, whoever you are, you need to know yourself.
Yeah.
And I mean, we all have a story. And the more we can build consciousness and awareness around our story, you know, that is the very best thing we can do, whether we want to date or whether we don't want to date. I'm a big fan of Brene Brown, and she says our stories, you know, the stories we tell ourselves, we have a way we explain everything. And she calls that our shitty first draft. So we want to get beyond that shitty first draft and find out what's really going on. So, you know, curiosity and that's where coaching is really helpful or in some cases therapy, because a lot of times if somebody's coming out of a relationship, they're carrying shame and they're carrying a lot of grief. And so if you want to attract another healthy adult into your life, you want to be putting out and presenting in the world the kind of energy you want to attract. So I wouldn't want somebody to go out there in their wounded self, because that's likely who they're going to attract back to them.
You know, I've said in a podcast before that a lot of people, and it was something that I think I said at the beginning of the podcast, where I see people, I divorced and it took me 3 years to even think about dating again. I felt like I needed to do a lot of work on myself. And I see people on social media, some, you know, Facebook friends where they'll divorce and within a year they're in another serious relationship. And I'm like, I feel like you really have to, because no matter what, no matter who wants a divorce, no matter what happened, it is a traumatizing experience. And if you don't really work on healing that, how good can you be for the next person? Do you agree with that?
Well, I want you to be good. I just honor all of that, what you said, Brenda, because I want the women I talk to, I want you to be good for you, you know, like loving yourself and honoring yourself and being the woman you want to be. And that's good enough for any person you want to date.
It's
Gotcha.
interesting. So I'm the which chromosomes do I have? Guys, remind me. I've got the X and the Y, right? Or do I have the Y and the Y? I never remember. I failed all of that part of biology.
Let me go back to that.
For me as a male, it was always very difficult wondering, how do I figure out if we can go somewhere with this relationship if I don't know some of the details of the past and how that may relate to what I see presenting itself right now. Do you have any guidance? Do you have any guidance for daters about how much to probe for this stuff? How much to?
I think it's a natural process of cultivating relationship, of being able to attach with one another. And by attach, I mean, we chemically bond with the person that we're in relationship with.
Yes.
So we can do that in a traumatic way if we're relating from our wounded self to their wounded self. But I would be really curious about, how are you showing up for yourself? What do you want? And what are your boundaries? Like, do you want to date someone who has untreated trauma? That's a really personal question.
Yeah.
So, and I'm just thinking, if you have to probe, I'm wondering, that's kind of a red, that pops up to me as a red flag. And if we could figure this out, we could all be very wealthy. How could we predict it? Right?
And do you really want to ask them that on their date? Because, some people really want to tell you.
Oh, yes.
Like you say, how are you today? And they start telling you like this. That
just spills out.
That was a perfunctory question. I really don't care how you feeling.
So I was dating a woman who doesn't live very far from Linda. And we were going all the way over to the eastern side of Westchester County. So Linda, about a 55-minute drive, because we went over the mountain. What's the Mount Peter? We went that route. So we had a lot of time in the car together. And I forget what got the conversation started, but we spent about 45 of those 55 minutes talking about not only the divorced husband, but also someone else who had entered her life soon after her divorce. And both of them had cheated on this person. And it just came out. I couldn't stop it. It was just like, once we got started, I'm sitting there driving on 287 going, holy cow, the floodgates are opened. And so for that situation, I was okay with it because she wanted to talk about it.
Yeah.
And I didn't have to probe.
But I mean, that's trauma. That's a person sharing the trauma. I'm just curious, did you have a sense, was she really physically, emotionally, mentally present with you, or was she in the story in her mind? I don't know if you guys, have you ever been with someone where you don't really feel like they're there with you?
I would say on a couple of occasions, Linda, I didn't feel like she felt my presence there because I was trying to interject and maybe kind of, offer
like
some kind of
back in or something.
No, kind of offer an affirmation of, wow, nobody should do that to a person. And it was like I wasn't even there. She just blew right by me.
That's trauma.
Exactly. And we eventually broke up at a point where we were talking about some very intimate things. And I wanted to honor how much she had made herself vulnerable by trying to provide her with some facts about me, biological facts. And that freaked her out that I was giving to her, hopefully some proof about what she had told me about. And I'm like, well, if we're going to keep going with this, then you should know the same level of stuff about me. And all of a sudden that triggered something. And she was like, oh, you can't be this nice. Nobody's this nice. You're setting me up for something. And I was like, whoa, okay, that's it. This is definitely over because this person's getting triggered. Prozac. Oh my God, Tonya.
A bottle of Brenda's wine or something.
Maybe a bottle of Brenda's wine. Maybe not Prozac.
I'm a Libra. My natural thing is I always want to fix someone. So at this point, I don't want to know about your trauma because I immediately start coming up ways to, help you get that together.
I'll tell you, one of the things that I did learn from my marriage was that I could not fix the other person. And so when I started dating seriously, and I'm open about it, I was dating during the separation period, because I felt like I'd already processed the end of the divorce. I mean, the marriage had died long before the divorce started. And this first person that I was kind of serious with, I told her straight up front, not sure what you're implying about some of the things from your past that you're relating to me. But I said, I just want to make sure you understand. I am not, in my mind, thinking, how can I fix you? I'm not here to find a solution to your problems. I'm here to be a sounding board. I'm here to listen, but that's it. That's my role. If you've got work to do, it's all yours. And I thought that person accepted it really well for a while. But I learned that in spades in my marriage. You're not there to fix anybody. Just let that go. Let that go.
Yeah.
And I find women get very resentful when you try to fix their problems. Us men, our inclination is to bring the solution. And it's like, shut your mouth and just let her talk. Because unless she says, can you help me find a solution to this problem? She doesn't want one.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's hard.
Absolutely.
Well, and sometimes people want empathy, right? That's what I love about coaching is the client leads the process, and I'm able to acknowledge and validate and give empathy. Because how many times have you told a story and you really just wanted to be seen, and you really wanted to have the experience of feeling like you had been seen and feeling that someone had heard you, and really all you needed was, I'm so glad you let me know that, and then you get a lot of advice. And empathy is such a powerful thing.
One of the best books I read, and I wish I could remember the title, Linda, it was when my ex and I were still trying to work on the marriage, and we were going through marriage therapy, and I found a couple of books in the library. And one of them said one of the best ways to both de-escalate an argument, but also help the other person realize that you're truly there for them, was to let them talk and then parrot back what they said. So what I just heard you say was, and I did notice, even with my ex-wife, whenever I employed that, more often than not, that helped those very difficult, awkward discussions that she and I were having about each other and our marriage and finances and kids and all of that. So what I just heard you say was, you don't appreciate it when I come home from work and I do this, this, and this. And you could see that some of the defensiveness literally drop off of that person's face. And that is such, to me, that's a tool I try to remember. I've got to remember to use it. So what do you think about that? Is that one of the ways in dating relationships, instead of asking questions, maybe all you need to do is just say, so what I heard you say was your husband cheated on you and this other person cheated on you, and it's been very upsetting to you.
Ladies, you want to...
I'm sorry, because the only reason I started laughing, let me explain because that's what they tell us in customer service. If you got a whack job, scream in your ear. So that's why I started laughing. I'm like, I'm at work with my headphones on. Okay, ma'am. Yes, I understand. So what you're saying is you ordered these fucking pants and they didn't come. And you want them for your party Friday night. But anyway, that's why I laugh. I was not disrespecting you, Richard. I didn't think you were.
Don't you worry.
I can hear my customer service training. I always get back to them what they
there's
said.
A reason
they want to be heard.
There's a reason why. Exactly.
From a customer service point of view, it works. It really does.
Yeah, they want to be heard.
Yeah, I haven't had it in a relationship, but customer service, it works.
Brenda,
go ahead, Richard.
I was just going to ask Brenda, has that ever felt patronizing to you if a man did that?
My ex-husband, we used to talk, and he routinely would say, he wouldn't say that, he would say, I can see it in his face where he's saying, okay, I'm just supposed to listen. I'm not supposed to fix. But it was always written all over his face. And I'm like, and he would just listen to me and be like, I'm like,
and that was
you're not saying anything. He's like, I'm just listening. I'm just letting you vent. And I'm like, he's employing those tactics.
So it didn't work for you. Is that what you're saying?
It did at the beginning. Then when it started to disintegrate, then I was like, oh, you're just patronizing me. But,
okay.
Yeah.
But I think actually for me, it was good because he realized that I wasn't trying to come home hoping he fixed my problems. I was just trying to come home and talk about whatever was bothering me. And he knew to listen. And he's like, I know I'm not going to offer any solutions because that's not what she's looking for.
Right.
So that worked up until some point with obviously other things happening.
Right.
But
there were mitigating circumstances.
Extenuating circumstances.
Yes.
There you go.
Linda, you said something earlier that I really want to ask you because in my marriage, it kind of happened that way where I felt like he betrayed me. He never admitted to it. And so I always felt like there's no closure there. But then it doesn't matter how many times you try to fix it or try to go back, you still don't feel safe. So one of the questions, which I think is I don't know how broad this is, but what are some of the common symptoms that you feel like you see over and over and over from people that have been betrayed like that, and then they try to move on into other relationships? And I'm sorry if I'm changing.
No, that's a really good question, actually. I think the anxiety or the hypervigilance, and you would think that if you've been betrayed once, that you are less likely to be betrayed again. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. You're actually easier to fool, which that's the brain science of it, because you're thinking lightning can't strike twice in the same place. So I would say the hypervigilance and a lot of times people taking personal responsibility for something that doesn't have anything to do with them. So it's really common when a person is betrayed, the person doing the betraying will displace that anger on the other spouse. So what I mean is, like, maybe, well, if I've heard, if you just give me enough sex, I wouldn't have to go out there and do that, and just sort of blaming. And so I see it's really common for women to blame themselves, that there was something they could have done differently. And human behavior is really complicated, and for every person who cheats, there's a million reasons why. But I always tell my partners, you didn't cause it, you can't control it, you can't cure it, and you have choices.
They had another choice. The person who did the betrayal had another choice. They chose the one that hurt you.
Well, and anything they do is information, right? Like, so if you can, I try and work with women to not take, it feels so intensely personal to be betrayed, like something must be defective, but it's really not. It really truly is about that other person. It's on them. And if you can help a person get what I call detachment, to get a little space in there to sort of see what's going on, that can really help see that it's really not about you. It's their issues, and they're choosing to deal with their issues in a way that violates the vows you've made to one another.
It's interesting, Linda. I started studying Buddhism in 06, 07 because I did a Google search one night to deal with this whole issue of how do I reduce my emotional attachment to someone who I feel is betraying me. I don't think it was a sexual affair, but there were other things going on in that person's life that I felt was just an outright betrayal. And I stumbled upon the concept of detachment. And I started studying it because I didn't understand it. It sounded so cold and calculated at first when I first started studying it. And then when I learned it from a Buddhist perspective and started to integrate it into both my faith practice as well as my emotional practice, it has been one of the best tools I've ever worked on.
Powerful.
It saved me in a million different situations.
Well, another person's behavior is not about us. It's about them, and it's information for us.
Yes. You know how I know, Tonya, how you feel about Steve Harvey. You know, he wrote this book about.
God, you're going to go there. Why are
know.
you going to do that to her?
Oh, I want to know how she feels about Steve Harvey.
Oh, Tanya's going to let you know in a minute.
I'm not even going to say anything about Steve Harvey. I have a whole nother thing going on. Go ahead.
So half the book. So the half of the book that really helped me was when he was talking about men's behavior, not about how we should. I don't buy into the whole how we should, behave around men, whatever. But when I think a lot of men were upset with him because he was like, opened up a Pandora box about how men really feel. And he said, men cheating have nothing to do with you. They cheat because they can. Because because they feel like, you know what? I can get away with it, so I'm going to do it. It has nothing to do with you. And that for me was transformational. Like, you know what? It doesn't matter. Like I say about my marriage, it doesn't matter that I cooked every day. It didn't matter that I never withheld sex. It didn't matter that the house was always clean. It didn't have anything to do with me.
So Brenda, detachment helped you elevate your self-esteem.
Oh, absolutely.
Or reclaim it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because I thought, you know what? That has nothing to do with me. Because in my mind, I feel like I couldn't be a better wife. Everything to do with him.
That is so
I couldn't have done more.
But I just want to affirm that. That is so powerful, Brenda.
Oh,
that is very powerful. Like it's not about you.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. No,
and
it was
you have
not.
that piece I hear you saying of living in alignment with your values. You were a good wife.
Oh, absolutely. Now, not to say that to this point, I feel like there probably wasn't any closure because he never admitted, even though like there's still that part of, I know it happened. I'm not crazy.
Yeah.
But he still claims it never happened. And it's like, why? Why did you have to mess up a good thing? But we're so past that, it's to me, it's neither here nor there because I've moved on. He can do whatever he wants. He's a great father to my kid. And that's the only relationship I'm interested in maintaining. It's a good co-parenting relationship.
But to do that, the first step was that you had to reclaim Brenda.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Not to say that yes, of course it hurt. It was the pain of being betrayed. It was earth shattering to me because, I was older. I was already 32. I had a career. I made a lot of decisions around my career for this marriage and to support his career. And so when you come across this betrayal that came out of left field because I never expected it because I thought it was such a good relationship, then it's like, wow, like I can't believe I put all of this trust in you and this is how it ends up. So I had to move, obviously. I have to move through that pain, right? And then figure out that in the end, you know what? I can't. I'm not going to stay. I'm not going to do this or the other. This has nothing to do with me and everything to do with him.
Well, what I want to say about the trauma when Brenda was talking is I'm not sure if I'm saying her name right, but Uma Abedin.
Oh, yes.
Uma Abedin. Yes.
Abedin. So I was reading excerpts from her new book. And she talks about the trauma she felt.
Yeah. I've been reading excerpts too.
You've been reading it too?
Yeah.
Richard, we got to have a read-a-thon together.
It's just so the woman that I'm dating went to see her speak with Hillary Clinton and got a complimentary copy of the book. So I was reading it the other night. And I focused in on those chapters for the sake of this, this session.
Wow.
What did you pick up? What did you pick up on, Tonya?
You know what? let's say that because I want to say because of her religion and her culture, she's automatically been told that this is this man, you're going to have to deal with this.
Right.
She grew up in our culture. She's westernized, but they have a Pakistani parent, and I think Israel. One parent is from Israel.
I think that's
and
true.
For her to have grown up in Jerusalem or wherever she grew up.
And she had a small child.
And for her to, well, I'm not even talking about the child. I'm thinking about the foundation that was set for her to feel like she had to keep forgiving Anthony. And then to see Hillary constantly forgiving Bill. And I think politicians' wives in general and rich men, powerful men, their wives would go through so much trying to maintain this whole illusion of wealth, prosperity, and happiness. So I really felt sorry for her. And I feel that had she not been in that position, and I'm not going to blame Hillary and Bill, but I think their relationship and Hillary forgiving Bill over and over sort of might have had some influence on her that if Hillary can do it, I can do it.
She never talked about that, though, in the book. I didn't read.
No, that's just my perception of how I felt. This is just based on the article that I read, just a couple of paragraphs. Well, what was fascinating to me is she said Hillary told her not to go and endorse him. And I'm like, girl, bye. You did not talk to anybody about their husband. Please, Hillary, no. I mean, you can be Tammy Wynette and stand by your man. I'm fine with that. But please do not, for the love of God, come and tell me that I should not stand behind my man when you still married to yours.
Well, and if it sounds like, I don't know the term gaslighting. Are you familiar with the term gaslighting? Yeah.
Smoke.
Yeah. So right there, when you love someone, you want to believe the best about that other person. And as crazy as it sounds, I talk to women where they really did have no idea. So, and it is shocking. That is a real trauma. And unfortunately, if you don't get the right help, then a lot of times if you go to your pastor or therapist, then you can get another layer of trauma because you don't get the right care. So it's a complicated topic.
We have talked, and guys, you should know, Linda has a very strong Christian faith. And all three of us, either individually or as a group, have talked in the past about how, unfortunately, sometimes Christian pastors will do, as Linda said, they will tell that person, sorry about your reality, but I'm going to push you back towards being in a situation with a person who's going to betray you. And that is another form of trauma. Can
I say this to be more specific? He's going to tell the woman to stay with the man.
So we're going to wrap up because we are going to bring Linda back sometime in Q1. Linda, any last thoughts on, for someone who is thinking, I'm ready to go back into the dating world after some kind of relationship that may have left me, I hate to use the word broken, but that I'm not whole, that I'm in pieces right now, or I've got pieces I need to knit back together. Any advice for people about, before you take the step to get a Match.com profile or to take someone up on that matchmaking offer that they had, maybe some questions they need to be asking themselves to kind of see, how much work do I need to do on myself?
Sure. Well, and I don't know that you can quantify that, right? No. So I believe that each of us, we're going to all be emerging adults until the day we leave this planet.
Yes.
And so the healthiest people I perceive are people who are curious about themselves, because the ability to be curious about someone else truly comes from within, about being curious with yourself. Yeah. And I think Brenda kind of answered the question with her analogy of putting on your own oxygen mask. If for someone thinking of dating, I would think you'd want to know at the very least, how that relationship, who you were in that relationship, and who are you going to be outside of that relationship. So being really conscious and clear about who you are. So then you can set the boundaries and the vision you want for the sort of person you want to be in relationship with.
It really, and again, I give that to my Buddhism. Buddhism asks you to try to be self-aware. I love that puppy. Hi, Legend. He's a cute. Hi, Legend.
Who wants to give you kisses, Brenda?
Loves her life. Nobody's been. That's mama. That's mama.
That is that. Yeah.
But
Today I was sweeping the floor and literally he was walking behind me and I'm like, gosh, go sit down somewhere.
Sometimes it's almost annoying that they're right on top of you.
Oh my
DJ
goodness.
is always like following me around. I can't even burp without him going, oh, you're taking me out? But the whole concept of, in Buddhism, we practice that as an emotion rises, that you acknowledge it, that you don't suppress it, you don't deny it. And so if I'm feeling jealous or if I'm feeling betrayed or angry, okay, I'm feeling betrayed. I've got to welcome that emotion. I'm not going to suppress it. I'm feeling it right now. Is it healthy for me to allow that emotion to dwell? No, it's not. So I'm going to ask it to leave. So you are present in the moment to say, this is what I'm feeling and it's okay that I'm feeling it, but I'm not going to let it dictate to me how I feel and what I'm going to do next. And I just think, all great relationships start with self-awareness on both sides.
Well, and with that emotion, Richard, why is that coming up? And even the unhealthy things we do are serving a purpose to try and protect us or help us.
Right.
So if we can get curious about why we're experiencing something, are we trying to stay safe? A lot of times is a big one.
Yeah.
So curiosity is always good.
So Linda, how can people find you and contact you through your coaching business?
Sure. Thank you. Well, my website's in process. That's onebraverlife.com, and that should be up very shortly. But it's fine for people to call me. And if you guys are okay with it, I'm all right to share that number. It's 845-233-0500. And I do work on a sliding scale with people. So I believe that there's no wrong door to care. I really want people to have a vision and a passion for seeing people not living in shame and being free.
And if there's one thing I can tell you about Linda is that if you are debating inside your head, do I have the money for this? Approach her first and let the two of you discuss how can she work with you to help you get healthy, because her heart is in getting you healthy. Don't take advantage of her, but don't think.
Thank you, Richard.
But don't think, don't think that it isn't worth opening.
There is a price list.
There's a price list.
Thank you.
There's a price list.
But at least have the conversation and give her a chance.
That's it.
No, absolutely. And this is important. People really need to invest in getting healthy.
Yeah.
We only have one life to live. So how sad would it be to go through life dealing with, this trauma, unhealed trauma, and you cannot keep a relationship. You can't be happy. Nothing is ever good enough. Something has got to give. And at some point we need to prioritize ourselves into the mix, because nobody wants, this may not be popular opinion, but I feel like nobody wants to go through life alone. Everybody wants to be loved. One way or another.
Yes.
Everybody wants to be loved. Everybody wants to be supported, whether it's romantic or not. Yeah. And healing allows you to bring that love into your life, I believe. So it's important.
Okay.
And the external love of a relationship starts with the internal love of yourself. That's where it starts.
Absolutely.
Ladies, thanks again for a wonderful evening. See you all very soon.
Thanks for visiting us, Linda. Have a great day. Good evening.
Thank you, Linda. Tonya. Thank you, Brenda. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
Bye.